So in our series of videos about leadership, we've already covered Enroll, we've already covered Inspire, and for this session I want to talk a little bit about communication. Now, when it comes to communication, we talk about the rule of 7. And I think it was Jack Welch, who was the CEO of General Electric, who came up with a version of this. So he said that, it's about the time that he's sick of hearing his own voice that people are actually starting to listen. So how often do we communicate? Do we communicate in the same way all the time? Do we check that people have picked up the email and actually listened to the conversation or the information that's in it? Should we be using WhatsApp voice messages or text messages, or dare I say it, the old-fashioned phone call? Because we know that people take on information in different ways. So it's important for us to communicate not only often, but in different methods to ensure what we're trying to convey is going to be heard. So we want to talk about the eyes, the ears, the heart listening, because often we don't just listen with our ears. We look at the person, we look at what they're trying to say to us. We can pick up on tone and emotion. So we want to make sure when we're communicating that tone and emotion are there, and how we're communicating is congruent with what it is we're trying to communicate. And should a leader go first or last when it comes to talking? That's a good question. And it really depends on the situation. So, there's a couple of good videos that we use. Simon Sinek was one of them. And he talks about leaders should go first when you're trying to convey vulnerability. When you're trying to go first and show vulnerability and that it's okay to be not okay, that's a good time for a leader to go first and speak first, because then they set the tone of the conversation and people will tend to follow that. So that's a good time to go first. But there's another school of thought, and again, it depends on the situation, when it's a good time for leaders to communicate last. And Patrick Lencioni does another good video on this, and I'm sure others have as well. Because as soon as, if you're not trying to be vulnerable in a situation, but let's say you've got a situation where you're trying to come up with ideas or get people to give an opinion on something, then if the leader goes first, then you almost taint the whole conversation. But if you say nothing as a leader and ask for everyone's thoughts, you get diversity of thought and diversity of opinion. And that can only be a good thing in an organisation. And then only once you've heard from everybody do you say your piece, because actually you've heard from the collective people in the team. So, just a couple of things to think about when it comes to how we communicate. Because once we've communicated, then we want to make sure that we've got a really good goal coming out from the communication. And then we can plan against the goal, and then we can act. We can decide who's going to do what. We can think about our strategy and actually what part everyone's going to play in that strategy. And then communicating values as well is a really important part of leadership. But actually not only communicating values, but demonstrating them, being congruent with the values. So, your communication by doing, because you're showing the team, because you're living and breathing the values, that's how things are done round about here. So actually being really congruent with what it is that we want to communicate. Because we want to move away from conjecture and towards focus, getting people really focused on what it is we're trying to do. And we do that through excellent communication.